I'm Glenn Powell, welcoming you to the Texas Tribune Festival. Every year, this weekend is about big ideas about the future of our state and our country. In case this is your first rodeo, you're going to hear things and meet people you don't agree with. And that's the point. At TribFest, the rules are we listen to each other. We treat each other with respect despite our differences, so be kind, be courteous, and most of all, be civil. And if you can't be civil, well, I happen to know a hitman.
Hey, y'all. All right. Silence your phones. This is how you do it. If you don't know how, ask your kids. I'm Michelle Martin. I am one of the hosts of Morning Edition from NPR. Thank you all so much for being here. Just to say a little bit about, and of course, this is Governor Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland.
Hey, guys.
So just to tell you a little bit about how this is going to go, we're going to talk up here among ourselves for a bit.
Yep.
We invite your questions. We didn't want this to be a fitness contest, so we're going to ask you. So you're going to race to the mic. So what we're going to do is ask you to, is it text or email? What is it, text or email? Text or email, what is it? Somebody who works here tell me. Huh? QR code, okay, great. So texastribune.org/ask, and about like 40 minutes in, Matt's gonna come up here within the Texas Tribune and read some of the questions, and then we're gonna leave just a couple of minutes at the end for the governor to give us a closing thought. Sound good? Sound good? And the other thing I thought I would do, if that's okay with you, is I thought we'd talk a little bit about you, a little bit about your own personal story, just because I'm not sure everybody here knows your story as well as people in your home state do. And then we'll, open it up to some bigger issues. Like, I don't know, I think there's a presidential election going on. Did you guys hear that? Yeah, so, okay. So let's talk a little bit about you, and if you don't mind my starting with a pain point. One of sort of a pivotal event in your life was when your dad died, when you were 3. And, I think people maybe have some stereotypes about what happened here, but your dad died from a viral infection that was treatable, but he didn't get the kind of medical care that he should have gotten. And that was a pivotal moment in your life, and if you don't mind, we're not gonna bring the whole thing, to a grinding halt, but why do you think it was such a pivotal moment? Obviously, anybody losing their dad is a pivotal moment. But what impact do you think it had on you and also your choices later in life about who you wanted to be and what you wanted to do?
And first, I would be remiss if I didn't say what an honor it is to be with you, Michelle, and just thank you for.
You're just making me sound old, so forget that.
I'm
no,
serious.
I don't think so.
No, it really is.
Let's
a big
keep it
deal.
moving.
And also just to the entire Texas Tribune team, and also to our leader, Sonal Shaw, who has been a longtime friend, and I'm so excited about her leadership that you continue to bring, Sonal. So God bless you. It's true where one of the earliest memories I have in my life was watching a system fail. Because my dad should still be here. He died from something called acute epiglottitis, which is essentially all of us have an epiglottis inside of our throat. Every time we breathe or chew or speak, the epiglottis lifts up. And essentially it allows air to get into your body, air to get into your lungs. And what acute epiglottitis is, essentially, it's when the epiglottis becomes so swollen that it can't lift itself, and it just sits on top of the windpipe. So essentially what happened was his body suffocated itself. And I watched him die in front of me when I was 3. And it was something where I watched how my mother struggled with that, because this is a woman who is an immigrant to this country, came from Jamaica, and was now trying to navigate and figure out how she was going to raise 3 kids on her own, and that was not the life that she prepared for or expected. And she struggled. and we all struggled. My mother did not get her first job that gave her benefits until I was 14 years old. And by the way, this is a woman who went on to earn a master's degree. So whenever we're working on policies or having conversations about inequitable pay between men and women or the wealth gap, I don't need a white paper to explain this. I grew up in this. I was a kid who had handcuffs on my wrist by the time I was 11. I was a kid who was sent to a military school when I was, almost 14 years old. I joined the Army when I was 17. So I'm standing here as probably the most improbable governor in America when you consider where we come from. But it was also one of the driving forces that really led me into wanting to work on these issues. Because I'm going to fight for people like my dad. I'm going to fight for people like my mom. I'm going to fight for people like my family members who, frankly, in many cases, are very distrusting of a system. And they're justified in their distrust of this system. But I think it was that background, it was that foundation that I think really helped to serve as not just my North Star, but also the platform in the way that I want to work on the issues that I want to work on.
Well, that leads to my next question, which is why governor? I mean, being governor is your first elected office.
Crazy.
So why that office? And I do want to say, the reason I ask that question is I think a lot of us in the media, we like to act like everybody was plotting their course to the presidency from the time they were like 12. You know what I mean? And I just, I'm sorry, that just isn't, I've covered politics long enough to say that's just not, I know we like that story, but that isn't generally the way it works.
Yeah.
But there are interviews with you going back to like 96 when you were a fellow, where you said, I'd like to be governor of Maryland one day. So why governor?
Well, it's interesting because, and people said that, what made you want to get into politics? And I was like, I didn't. I wanted to be the governor. Because governor is a different kind of role. I mean, governor, you're the chief executive of the state. And people forget sometimes, when you're talking about education policy, the president doesn't control education policy in local jurisdictions. Neither does the Secretary of Education. Do you know who does? Governors and state legislatures. When we're talking about things like transportation policies, the president doesn't control transportation policies that take place in individual states. The president controls allocation of dollars that go towards there. But you know who actually is putting together the plans? The governor. I mean, literally every aspect of our life, the governor is really one of the more crucial elements and crucial leaders in that. And so it's time when people say, well, I'm thinking about running for Senate or running for governor, or I'm thinking about running for Congress, or running for mayor. My honest answer is run, because they have no idea what either job actually does. Truly, these are different jobs. And so I remember when I was working I ran one of the largest poverty-fighting organizations in this country before I ran for governor. Michelle's right, I had never run for office before in my life. And we were working with a former governor at the time. Now former governor, but we were working with the governor to try to get him to focus on child poverty. Because if there is one issue that I swear I would give anything to be able to end, it is the issue of I do not understand how a country like ours allows so many children to grow up in poverty and basically condemning them before they even have a chance. And so we were trying to get him to make adjustments on the child tax credit. And I'm a data person, so I was literally giving him all the data about what we could do to make adjustments on the child tax credit, how they could have a significant impact on children living in poverty and moving them out of poverty. And was basically saying, you should talk about it in your state of the state. Here's the line you should use. I literally became like a speechwriter for what they could do to actually address child poverty. I get an advanced copy of the speech. There's nothing in there about child poverty, and there's nothing in there about the child tax credit. So I'm a little bit upset. I call up the head of public policy on our team at the organization, and I'm ranting. And 5 minutes after I was done and I took a breath, he said to me, listen, we worked for 6 months to try to get them to include a line in the speech. But what if you could write the whole speech? And that's the point. And so in our inaugural address, in our first State of the State address that I gave as governor, we had a whole section about how we were going to make the most aggressive, full frontal, and bipartisan assault on child poverty that our state has ever seen, and that's exactly what we've done in the state of Maryland.
What do you know? I have it right here. Let me just be clear with you. We did not talk ahead of time except to say hi and how are your kids.
That's right.
So our conversation is completely here. And you said, we know it's unacceptable that while Maryland has the highest median income in the country, 1 in 8 of our children lives in poverty. Yeah. We know it's unacceptable that in the home state of some of the best medical institutions on the planet, there are more than 250,000 Marylanders who lack health coverage. And we've been asked to accept that some of us must be left behind, that in order for some to win, others must lose. So you go on, I refuse to accept that. So the other thing you said, that is your inaugural. The other thing you said in your speech, which I thought was interesting, you were showcasing your lieutenant governor. Both your mother and her mother are immigrants. Yeah. One of the things you said is, yes, Aruna's and my portraits are going to look a little different from the ones we've always seen in the Capitol, but that's not the point. This journey has never been about making history. It's about marching forward. And this is interesting because this is some months before the current Democratic ticket became what it is. Yeah. A little bit of a message there to her, to the nominee, the now Democratic nominee?
Yeah. And I think the message is simple. It's, I became the first black governor in the history of my state.
And the third black governor in the country.
And the third black governor in the history of this country. Mm-hmm. And I think about that where my grandfather was actually the first one on my mom's side of the family born in this country. And when he was just a toddler, it was the Ku Klux Klan that ran them out. They were living in South Carolina. And my great-grandfather was a minister, and he was a very vocal minister. And eventually the threats became so real that in the middle of the night he picked up his family and they left. And they didn't just leave South Carolina, they left the country. They went back to Jamaica. And much of my family stayed in Jamaica. And they always said, I will never go back to that country. And much of my family has not. A lot of my family is still in Jamaica. But my grandfather did. And my grandfather, in all of his humility, he would say, this country would be incomplete without me. And so he came back to this country. He went to Lincoln University and HBCU, and he became a minister, like his grandfather. And he actually became the first black minister in the history of the Dutch Reformed Church. And the reason I bring that up is that the same threats that were coming to his father started coming to him when he became a minister. And he stuck. And he stayed. And he fought, and he loved the Lord, and he loved his family, and he loved the community until literally his last breath. He's a person who had a deep Jamaican accent his whole life and was maybe the most patriotic American I've ever met. And the reason I bring that up is I would have conversations with my grandfather about how he was the first black minister in the history of the Dutch Reformed Church. And he was always very, very clear with me. He said, making history is not the assignment. That's not the point. And I know it's the same type of approach that I took when I became the first black governor of the history of our state, that me becoming the first black governor is not the accomplishment. What you do when you're in the seat is. And how you use that time that you have left inside of that seat to be able to make an impact on the lives that you care about and a community that you love and support. That's what actually matters. And so, the thing that I'm really excited about Vice President Harris is, she is going to make history in November. And we're going to help her make history in November. But that's not the assignment. Her making history is not the assignment. Her shattering a glass ceiling is not the assignment. The reason that I'm excited to be able to support her is not because that on Inauguration Day she is going to do something that we have never seen before. It's because she's going to help us create, and we're all going to work together to create the kind of country that we've never seen before. That's why I'm excited to be able to support her.
Okay, so you're casting forward to January. Let's come right back to now. That you clearly ran on. It's interesting how much your inaugural address kind of foreshadows some of the themes of this national campaign. But you ran as an optimist. The vice president and her team are running as optimists. What's the evidence that that's working?
Well, I think the evidence is the history of this country. I think this country has had a remarkable history. I think this country's had a remarkably uneven history. I think that this country has always been a country that has strived to live up to its ideals. and oftentimes has fallen short of them. There's a great line by Donny Hathaway, who's a great singer, in a song called Song for You, where he says, "I know your image of me is what I hope to be." And I think that's America, right? Where I know your image of me is what I hope to be. That America comes off, America is this bastion of hope and opportunity, but oftentimes in the history of America, it has been for some. And I think the part of this process of this American journey is that it's all of us who actually have a unique role in helping to actually make a more perfect union. But the thing that I know about our country is in these times and in these moments where America has to make a choice, more often than not, we've chosen hope, right? More often than not, we've chosen to be more inclusive. More often than not, we've actually chosen to go up to our better angels and not to our worst devils. More often than not, we've actually chosen to be that hope that the world hoped for with America. And so I just believe that, elections are oftentimes the election season in America is actually this really interesting balm because it allows us to make a choice and allows us to try to heal. And I think in this election, we have very real choices as to what type of country we hope to be.
It's interesting, though, because I've been covering politics long enough to remember. I remember when, former First Lady, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was preparing for her run for the presidency. And I remember, because I'd covered the White House with George H.W. Bush, Bush 41. And I remember talking to a person who had been part of his team and then subsequently went to work for 43 and so knew all the folks and had been really close to the family. She says, and she said to me, well, Americans don't like angry politicians. The idea being that Hillary Clinton was too angry. She's too ambitious. She's too angry. She said, well, Americans don't like angry politicians. You think? Well, somehow that kind of switched up. So what I'm curious to ask is, why do you think, this race is very close. You cannot deny it. Whatever, we can have a conversation in January about whatever happens in January, but right now, this race is razor thin. It's within the margin of error just about every place you look.
That's right.
Except for certain indicators like the gender gap where something is huge, things of that sort. Okay.
And it will be till Election Day.
Overall is very tight. Why do you think it is? Look, you've said, she said, a lot of other Democrats said that this country wants, former President Obama said this country wants hope, not fear. But that is a very angry ticket on the other side. Why do you think their message is as resonant as it is?
I think it's a remarkably exploitative ticket. I think that there is a natural tendency that happens in politics, and I think what we're seeing from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance is they're masters of it. It's this idea of making people afraid, telling them about everything in their life is to blame from somebody else, and let's actually tell you who's to blame for it, and then we're going to use that and weaponize it and politicize it. And I think it's a very well-drawn and frankly well-trodden playbook in American politics that I think keeps that level of divide. And I think what they're doing is they're playing to the level of skepticism that people do have about the system, which, I have to be honest, is justified. Like, there's a reason that people are skeptical. And I think we have to be honest about that. We cannot walk around and pretend like everything is perfect. I've said, and it's true, where, I had to convince members of my family to vote for me when I ran for governor. And it's not that my family and I aren't cool, it's that I actually had to convince them to vote. Right? I don't come from
what did they say, which is, what difference does it make? They're all the same?
What difference does it make? It's like, and it's also the idea of people are living really complicated lives. And if a person is like, listen, I'm just trying to make sure that my kids are safe. I'm just trying to make sure that I can keep my house. I'm really just trying to make sure and trying to figure out what can I do to make sure that my kids are getting what they need and also my aging parents are getting what they need. And I'm kind of sandwiched and stuck. What am I doing to make sure that I can actually get job opportunities, that I can actually honor the work that I'm doing? And so when that happens, when that is your focus, when you're just trying to manage day to day, it becomes very difficult to think about, well, aren't you excited about Election Day? Like, there are people who are literally like, I didn't realize Election Day was last week.
You know
just
what?
wasn't on my mind.
So let's work through one of those issues that continues to be a pain point for Democrats, which is crime, okay?
Yeah.
Street crime, okay? This is not the way most sort of street crime is adjudicated and managed, it's not generally a national issue.
Yeah.
But that was an effective talking point for the former president in his first campaign, and it's a talking point for him now.
Yep.
Crime continues to be a pain point for Democratic leaders, okay? Statistically, crime is down in Maryland, as it is in much of the country, yet it continues to be a pain point.
Yeah.
So why is that? And what can Democratic leaders do about that?
Yeah.
And I'll just give you an example of, look. Let's just, since I just want to establish that I know what I'm talking about. You know, look, Maryland the homicide rate is down like 30% in Baltimore, which is one of the major cities in Maryland. Those of you who haven't been there, there are 3 sort of big population centers in Maryland. 2 of them are in the suburbs, one of them is Baltimore City. And homicide is down like 30% over the year, last year to year, okay? But yet, there has been a string of high-profile incidents. There was a shooting in Baltimore that killed 2 people, injured 28. There have been a string of carjackings. Carjackings continue to be among the highest in the country. Certainly, you know what, if it's you, with some kid sticks a gun in your face, 1 is too many, right? And also, there's this crazy story in one of the suburban counties, one of the more affluent suburban counties, where there's a 12-year-old who keeps breaking into car dealerships you know what I'm talking about? Every single night, luxury car dealerships, and the police keep catching him, and he keeps doing it. And they're saying, it's not you per se, but it's your fault because we can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
The reason I raise that is that juvenile justice is one of those areas where you have had a lot of thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
And you have worked in this area, but a lot of your thoughts take a long time to implement. And people are like, I want this to stop now.
Yeah.
So can you just talk about that for a minute and sort of parse that, how you think about that and how you think that you can achieve results while still holding to both your values and your sense of what's good policy?
And I think it's important for leaders.
Is that a fair question?
It's a very fair question. And I do think it's important for leaders to not get caught up in the binary conversation about how exactly to address it. Because oftentimes people say, well, you know, I remember I had it, right? And people are like, well, are you pro law enforcement or are you pro community? And I'm like, I didn't know I had to choose. And, you know, my answer was, you know, I'm very much coming at this from the kid who was 11 years old and felt handcuffs on his wrists. And the kid who know that they needed second chances. And I got them. And that's why I can stand up here on this stage. I'm also coming from a perspective of a kid who grew up in a neighborhood where we wanted to make sure that we felt safe. And we felt like people were not looking out for our best interests, and we did not have a system that was actually working to make us safe. And that we wanted a police force that moved with absolute integrity and full accountability and full transparency. But we wanted to have a police force that was actually doing those things. And so the way we've approached it in our work is basically saying we're going to take an all-of-the-above approach. We have made record investments in local law enforcement. We've made record investments in utilization of technology and predictive analytics and making sure you're closing cases. We passed laws and legislation that focus on victims' compensation, because if you are the victim of a crime, the best person who can help us to actually close that case is the victim of the crime. So we want to make sure that they are supported and feel completely supported to make sure that we can get people who are harming our community members off of the street. We've also passed legislation that focuses on things like, you know, how do we have a more holistic and a better approach when it comes to juvenile justice? So it doesn't have to be where there is no accountability, nor does it have to be that we are going to, you know, make every sentence a life sentence. But we've been able to do that and make all these different approaches, being able to invest in community organizations and violence reduction, knowing that it has got to actually translate to what's happening in people's lives. So yes, we're proud that in Maryland now, in our 19 months, Maryland now has amongst the most precipitous drops of homicides and violent crimes of anywhere in the country. If you look at the city of Baltimore City went 8 straight years under my predecessor, went 8 straight years with 300 plus homicides. Now, in Baltimore, we're down 30% year on year. Last year, down 33% year on year. The last time the homicide rate was this low in Baltimore, at this time of this year, I was not born yet. Those are the kind of drops that we're seeing in homicides and violent crime. But we also have to make sure that people in the communities can feel it. And so it's not just about throwing statistics at people's faces and saying, look, guys, the statistics don't lie. But what they're also saying is, but if I don't feel safe in my neighborhood, that matters too.
How do you make them feel it?
I think you have to actually get out in the community and show.
How do you show what isn't happening?
Well, I think what you have to do is when you're going out in the community, and the reason that we are out in the community so much, the reason we're working with our local leaders and our violence reduction groups so much is because we want to show the people in our communities that we are going to be aggressive on this and we are not going to stop. That we are going to pass legislation that is going to make people feel safer, and we're actually going to show them what it looks like in application. Because I'm not going to be a governor that is going to spend my time attending funerals and giving thoughts and prayers and not doing anything to make people actually feel safer inside of their communities. We're going to make sure they know this is our highest priority.
You just signed a bill in this legislative session that actually expands the list of crimes that 10 and 12-year-olds can be charged with.
Yes.
And a lot of the people who were your original supporters, people who'd worked with you on child and juvenile justice issues, were furious about this. They,
Yes.
they considered it a betrayal of the work that you had done throughout your career up to that point. What do you say to those people? They say, that's crazy. What do you say?
I say that being able to love our young people does not mean making them unaccountable. Mm-hmm. I think the thing that we need to be able to do for our young people is to make sure that those supports actually are in place. Because what we do not want is for a young person who ends up having repeated crimes, repeated incidences, and we're not willing to dig into what is happening to that child in the home. We're not willing or able to dig into what's happening with the background of that child. And then what you're going to end up having is you have a child who is breaking, who will turn into an adult who is broken. And now we're dealing with bigger consequences. So we work with both community organizations, we work with public defenders, we work with community organizations, we work with law enforcement to pull together a piece of legislation. And I understand there might be a certain level of frustration that people have. But the thing that I know is this, is for our children, if you give me the ability to not just quote unquote punish, but to make sure we now have an ability to wrap supports around that child. To make sure we now have an ability to be able to really dissect what is going on in that child's mind and what is going on in that child's life that is causing them to be a repeat offender. And oftentimes we're not talking about anything. We're literally talking about violent offenses. Mm-hmm. And if we have a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old who is a repeat violent offender, I want to know what is going on. I want us to be able to intersect and to be able to help and reform them. But what I do not want is for that to turn into a revolving door and for a lack of accountability to now turn into an adult who's doing much more serious crimes.
It takes more words to say than it does to say lock them up.
Yes.
Lock them up. It takes more words to say that. And the last question I have on this is, can you, and this has been a problem for Democrats, is that it's kind of like slow medicine versus an operation or a pill. Yeah. And we are, I love America too, but we are short attention span people.
We are.
And we tend to like an operation or a pill, fix it now. Yeah. And to say, let's try a couple things, let's see what happens. Slow medicine, right? It might be more effective in the long run, but how do you persuade people on something like this that so hits you where you live, literally, that slow medicine is better? How do you persuade people of that?
I think first of all, you have to actually bring them into the conversation. I think part of the challenge we've always had when it comes to issues of criminal justice and particularly juvenile justice is for a lot of communities, we feel like we're getting spoken to and not spoken with. So I think you have to be able to actually include them into the conversation. I think the second thing is that we have to be able to delve into the complexity of the conversation and say, yes, we understand there is a priority in making sure that people feel safe now. We get that. And we need to do that and address that. And I think that's part of what the legislation did. However, we also have to understand that we are never going to militarize our way out of this problem. You're never just going to militarize your way into a safer community or a safer society, because I'm telling you, there will be long-term, in some cases unintended, in some cases intended consequences for that. If we just simply think the answer is just how are we going to, quote unquote, lock them up, as you say. So I think it means we have to be focused, we have to be attentive, we have to bring people into the conversation, and we have to show actual results. Because I think the results that we're able to show will actually give people a sense of buy-in and give people a sense of patience that the strategy that we're taking on is one that's actually intended to work.
So let's pivot now to, you mentioned militarize our way out of it. You are a veteran yourself, served in Afghanistan. It's interesting that And you're the first veteran to be governor for some decades now. We have 2 veterans on the national ticket, on the Republican side, on the Democratic side. Yeah. And military service has become, their military service has become something of a, I don't know, political football, if I can call it that. And I'm just wondering, how do you think about that? There have been efforts to, do you all know what I'm talking about? Yeah, okay, just want to make sure. Malign the service.
It's happened to me.
And I just, how should we think about that? Especially in an era when a lot of people have no personal experience with military service. I mean, you know, you see somebody in uniform, people are like, thank you for your service. And then you're like, okay, that's it. But how do you think about that?
Yeah.
And I'd like, if I may, I'd like to ask if you could answer that in a way that isn't just about the ticket. I mean,
yeah, of course.
Does that?
Of course.
You know,
less than 1% of this country has worn the uniform of this country. And so when we're talking about veterans issues, frankly, when you're having a national conversation with this country, it's more of a voyeuristic conversation because people haven't experienced it. And I'll tell you from my personal experience, you know, I joined the military when I was 17. I was so young, my mother had to sign the paperwork for me. But after my teenage years, she signed whatever paperwork the Army put in front of me. And I eventually went on, I became an officer. And I was in the reserves, and I actually volunteered to serve in Afghanistan. One of my dear friends, who was a deputy brigade commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, a unit that was one of the most elite units in the entire military that was getting ready to deploy to the eastern border of Afghanistan, which was one of the most dangerous parts of the world at the time. And he told me one day, he said, when are you going to get into the fight? And I literally told my fiance that I was called up. She didn't realize that we don't do call-ups anymore. Does she know? Now she does. Yeah. But we're married now, so it's all good.
I can call her and know how to reach her.
That's right. And I deployed with the 82nd. I deployed with some of the most amazing warriors that I could have ever served with. And you know, when I was over there, I led soldiers in combat. You know, we specifically had a role where we were working to bring Taliban back over to our side. And you know, if you look at my officer evaluation reports, I was literally marked as a top 1% officer. My senior rater said I was the best lieutenant that he worked with in all of Operation Enduring Freedom in the entire Afghanistan campaign. So I'm deeply proud of my service. I'm deeply proud of the commitment that we made to this country. And I would do it over and over again because I love this country deeply. And I look at what's happened to so many of these soldiers and airmen and Marines and sailors, how you're watching this push back on their service. Like, these are not people who raised their hands when the country asked. Like, these are not people who were willing to not just leave their families, but willing to leave their bodies when the country asked. And so, you know, I don't have patience nor tolerance to be lectured by anybody, particularly for people who have no idea what they're talking about and have no idea about the emotions that are going through that soldier or sailor or airman or Marine's mind as they're getting ready to say goodbye to their family, not knowing if that's the last thing they're going to be able to say to them. And so whether we're talking about Sergeant Major Waltz, someone who's devoted 24 years of his life wearing the uniform of this country and willing to leave it all on the line, or whether we're talking about Corporal Vance, people who raise their hand because the country asked, I frankly just think that we have to remember that thank you for your service cannot just be a statement. There needs to be meaning behind it. And when we have two people who truly were willing to pay the highest price to be called American, and who now we know that, you know, that the Vice President of the United States, the next Vice President of the United States, will be someone who has worn the uniform of this country, no matter who wins in this thing. I just say there's a deep sense of pride as a veteran. that I have in that. And I just think that even in political chaos and political craziness and the foolishness that election season brings, being able to remember that and being able to remember, as I did when I came back home, I then said, I'm going to devote my life to making sure that I'm fighting for veterans. That's exactly what we've done in the state of Maryland, and that's a commitment that I will always have.
But if you are being attacked for your service, this is the last question I have about this, because we have a lot of stuff to talk about, but you're being attacked for it,
Yeah.
what should you do?
You know, it's interesting. So I was, you know, when people attack me for my service, or you know, or in my case, you know, I was just recently attacked because 20 years ago on an application, while I was in combat, my commanding officer instructed me to put a Bronze Star on my application because he's helped me with my application. He was a former White House fellow, and he told me that I was going to be awarded it, and he instructed me, put it on your application, and the paperwork never processed.
Because that never happens in the Army.
Yeah, because paperwork issues never happen in the Army, let's be clear. I love our military. They train us to be war fighters. Paperwork is not our specialty oftentimes. And people have said, well, why didn't you go back and correct it? Something that happened 20 years ago. The truth is I forgot about it. The truth is that I was just happy to make it home. The truth is that I didn't serve because I was looking for a medal. I didn't serve because I was looking for an award. I served because I love my soldiers. I served because I love this country. And I'm honored that, and I'm very humbled that my commanding officer, who by the way is now a 3-star general in the Army, once he found out that morning, he said, that's the first I heard that you didn't get it. He was upset that the paperwork didn't process. And he said, I'm actually going to resubmit you for it, for the Bronze Star. And so he's actually in the process of doing that right now. But I think the way I deal with it is I don't. I don't have time for foolishness. I don't have time to play these games. I'm too busy trying to make the lives of Marylanders better. I'm too busy trying to make sure that our veterans are taken care of. We passed legislation in my first 19 months that made sure that Maryland is now the first state in this country that has a pathway for free dental care and health care for members of our National Guard. We're the first state we've expanded PTO, paid time off, for people who serve in both state government and also who are members of the National Guard, because nobody who is serving our country should be using their paid time off to do their drill duty. They should use paid time off for what it's worth. That we passed legislation to focus on giving preferential hiring treatment to spouses of military veterans, because when people look at the resumes of spouses, they say, well, it looks like you can't hold a job. No, the reason I can't hold a job for more than 2 years is because we keep on moving. And so making sure you're giving preferential hiring treatment to spouses. So I think the way that we deal with it and the way that I deal with it is I don't have time for foolishness. I never have, I never will. And so I think the thing that we do, what real patriots do, we keep our heads down and we do the work. And that's exactly how I respond to this.
Okay. So I just want to remind you that you can join our conversation. In fact, I think Matt from the Tribune is going to come up in a couple minutes. If you've been sending questions in, he's going to come up and tell us what they are. In fact, Matt, why don't you work? Oh, there you are. Well, hello. Hello.
It's like a puff of smoke.
I was going to say, that's Matt from the Tribune. He's got your questions. Hopefully you have some.
I do. We'll start with this.
Sorry, hold on a second. You ready for questions from me?
I'm always ready. This is great.
A 15-year-old high school student in the audience says they see the civic apathy among young people who believe no candidate truly represents them. How do you overcome this?
Such a good question. To that 15-year-old student, I would say this, is there's two things I think to remember in this idea of civic engagement. One is that come November, we are going to elect someone to serve as the President of the United States. That person is going to have a very real responsibility to be able to either make our lives better or to complicate them significantly. And who sits in that seat matters. And the thing that we know when you look at the history of presidents of the United States, or frankly of any role that we have of leadership in our society, that nobody is going to be perfect. If we are holding out in the hope of perfection, then we're going to have a very difficult time ever becoming engaged. What we have to do is find the people who are raising their hands and running for this office, who are most aligned on our vision, most aligned on our values, most aligned on our hopes, most aligned on our aspirations, and who we feel is not just going to be thinking about us when they make the decision at the end of the day, but the people who might even include us in that conversation. And so it's that 15-year-old, and again, I have my personal opinions. I think this is a very clear choice when I think about those as gating criteria for who we're going to elect. For that 15-year-old, I would just simply say, it is important that we do not become disengaged. And it's important that we do not become disillusioned, but that we really do focus on who is the person that can help to bring us to that better place, and that's the person that I can and I will support. The second thing I would just say, though, is this, is public engagement and civic engagement does not start and end with voting. Our ability to be able to be engaged in this process is much deeper than that. You know, I was saying earlier to a remarkable group of students earlier, is that, you know, there are some people right now in our lives who have no titles at all and are doing amazing things to make the world better. And there are some people who have really big titles who are doing absolutely nothing in those seats that they're sitting in. Our ability to be able to engage in the future of our society is actually our ability to be able to make the change that we're hoping for. And if you look at the history of this country, our country has been made better and has been led by people who weren't necessarily politicians, who weren't necessarily running for presidents, but whose mark on this country is indelible because they love this country enough and they cared enough to be engaged. And that's what we're hoping for each person who has the privilege of calling themselves a citizen.
Polarization is crippling us, but what's feeding it are things we've never had before, such as social media. Do we need a new set of civic tools to address polarization?
I think so. I think we need a new set of tools. I think we really need to think critically about the guardrails that we have for some of these tools that are there now. I think some of the tools that we have right now, frankly, are unregulated and becoming increasingly dangerous. And so I do think we need to really think critically about what type of guardrails exist for some of these tools. But the other thing that I'd say is this, is what did we do before social media? What did we do before these tools? We talked to each other. We got to know each other. I think, you know, sometimes we have these platforms whose intention, or at least stated intention, is to make us increasingly connected. But actually what's happened is they've driven us further apart because they've allowed us to now sit in our own ecosystems. They've allowed us to now either curate or have algorithms that can help to curate the type of information we receive, who we listen to, who we speak with, who's blocked, who's let in. And I think that there is something also incredibly complicated and dangerous about that too. And so I'd say that yes, we need to have new tools. Yes, we need to do a better job of actually thinking about how can you come up with better ways of creating guardrails around some of these tools, because I'm telling you, the intent of some of these tools is not good. And actually what we're seeing is the actual intent of these tools and the people who've then taken control of them, who we're now saying are going to be in control of government deregulation, which is amazing. Anyways.
Let me ask you this. I'm just curious about this. Do you think, I'm interested in this question of whether you think there's a double standard for and I don't mean to be this a partisan question, although it can feel like it is, but there's kind of a double standard for elected leaders like yourself. People who meet certain sort of, it could be demographic, it could be philosophical, it could be ideological. The reason I was thinking about that is that I remember talking to former President Obama when he, on the occasion of publishing the first volume of his memoir, and And I just said, look, it has to be sort of driving you crazy, that sort of norms of behavior that you were held to, and yet other people can act very differently and be okay. And he said, yeah, I got criticized for wearing a tan suit.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that. Do you think that there's a double standard, and why is that, and why do you do it? I remember he was criticized for being too much of a celebrity. He was like, oh my God, what does he think he is, a rock star? And then you
literally have a person who's built his career as a celebrity.
Yeah. So
there's absolutely double standard. There's 100% double standard. But frankly, there's always been a double standard. Mm-hmm. I mean, the things that will take up a 3-week news cycle in our life are things that is like a Tuesday for other people. I get it.
So what do you do about that? I mean, do you self-regulate accordingly, or what do you do?
Yeah, I honestly think that the thing that I do, and it's really not trite, I don't have a better answer, is I just try not to worry about that. I can't. I think if I were to be consumed by the amount of double standards that exist, I would not be able to function. If I were to be consumed by the fact that the goalpost just ironically just keeps on moving for us, I don't know if I could ever perform, because you're asking yourself to shadow box with a ghost.
And if you complain about it, you're a whiner. Right?
That's
what
exactly
is he
right.
whining?
That's exactly right. And so honestly, I think that it's the way that I deal with it is I stay busy. I just keep doing the work, and I look at the fact that right now we're seeing how in our state we're continuing to make remarkable progress around our state, and we're making it everywhere across our state, going to Republican areas, Democratic areas, all this kind of stuff. And I think there was a poll recently just came out that we're had a 64% approval rating, one of the highest in the entire, third highest approval rating in the entire country of any governor in the country. And I think the thing that we wanted to show people is that no matter what can come in, or arrows, or the complaints, or the trolls on social media, the reason that they don't get at me is I don't pay attention to them. And I try to live by this philosophy of, don't let people that don't matter too much matter too much. Don't let people that don't matter too much matter too much. And if we allow these folks to get in our heads, then they win, because that's their goal. That is their aspiration. And I just refuse to let them win.
Except that I will say that talking about people who don't matter too much. You know what matters a lot is how people are getting their information.
Yes.
And you have information systems which are avowedly controlled by ideologues with
Correct.
a political agenda.
Correct.
Okay? One of them, not to get too deep into the weeds, but we all know what I'm talking about here. And you have, a major network which is controlled by a person with an avowed political agenda and political sympathies on one side. And we can debate about whether it was always fair.
Social media platforms.
Who's fair. But the reality of it is, in your state, a major newspaper has been taken over by, the major news outlet has been taken over by somebody with an avowed political agenda, which he's very explicit about. And my question is, how do you get around that?
Yeah. So you're right, frankly, that's where you kind of need external supports on that. And I think that there are people and authorities whose job it is to make sure that those type of things are regulated and those guardrails are in place, and I hope that they would do that. And at the same time, the thing that I know is that they are not going to be the only voice. And frankly, I think we honestly are in a society right now where I think you're watching a growing level of people who are tired by that. And I think the results will continue to show that people, when they know that they are being manipulated, when they know that they are being, when they know that they are being, that their opinions are being complicated and their opinions are being compromised, they will then choose to use their democratic and frankly their capitalistic abilities to go elsewhere. And I think that what we just have to continue to do is continue to show alternatives that people can have, that can show them that you don't have to be manipulated with the quote-unquote news that you are receiving.
Matt, speaking of tired, you probably try to stand in there.
No. What difference does it make for your job as governor of Maryland if Trump wins?
I cannot stress enough how complicated this will end up being for the people of our state. And I'll break down a couple things. So let's just take Project 2025 as one example. I'm not sure how many people have had a chance to read through the entire 900-plus page. We have. I'm not sure if there's a state that is greater impacted by Project 2025 than the state of Maryland. Not to mention the fact that when you're talking about the elimination of mid-level jobs, when you're talking about the elimination of entire departments, do you know what many of those people have in common? They're Marylanders. They're people who live in my state. And so you're talking about the laying off of jobs of people who happen to call my state home. You're talking about, what it means to actually have a partner who's willing to see us. Listen, and this is not political. This is just a fact that the former president of the United States called my state's largest city rat-infested, and why would anyone choose to live there? By the way, he was talking about my hometown. I think about the bridge response, where when the Key Bridge.
I'm not sure everybody knows what you're talking about, so explain.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Key Bridge is a major thoroughfare for.
Yes. A major thoroughfare and one of the iconic bridges, almost a 2-mile span bridge that we have in the state of Maryland. And on March 26th, early in the morning, a ship that was the size of 3 football fields slammed into the Key Bridge, and the Key Bridge collapsed instantaneously. And we lost 6 Marylanders that morning. Thousands of workers had their jobs eliminated when the Port of Baltimore was closed. And the Port of Baltimore is worth 13% of my economy. At 3:30 in the morning, I got my first phone call. We were up and working and mobilizing our forces in response. The first phone call that I got from the White House was at 3:30 that morning. I had the President of the United States, I had the Vice President of the United States say to me that we're going to be with you every step of the way, and they have been. I can't imagine the response would have been the same. I can't imagine that, and I think about the idea and again, I'm not just saying this from belief. I'm speaking to other governors and some of my other colleagues who say things like, imagine having to do that when a president of the United States is telling you things like, you should ask me nicely. I can't. And so the reason that I will spend the next, I think it's now 58 days in a wake-up, as we said in the Army. The reason I will spend the next 58 days in a wake-up doing anything and everything in my power to make sure that we are inaugurating President Kamala Harris and Vice President Tim Walz is because they are the partners. Is because they are the partners that we are going to need. And when I think about what's happened in the state of Maryland in these first 19 months, I get excited because I'm like, imagine if you give me another 4 years. We're going to do some great work, but we need to have the right partners in these seats to get it done.
Why do you think the Republican Party is unable to address issues of poverty and race? Is there a path for bipartisan cooperation on these issues?
What's the first part of the question?
Sure.
I didn't hear the first.
Sure. Why do you think the Republican Party is unable to address issues of poverty and race? Is there a path for bipartisan cooperation?
Okay. Are they
on these
unable
issues?
to? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that they're unable to. I think they have a different.
Yeah. And listen, I'm going to be honest with you. I would not put that on a party. I put that on America. I'm just be honest. I mean, listen, if it was easy for this country to deal with issues of race and poverty, we would not have racism and poverty. And I'm not putting that on a political party. I'm not saying that is because one group hasn't done enough to be able to address these issues, because I don't think America has done enough to address these issues. I don't think this country. When I think about some of the moments where we've had real breakthroughs and real heartbreaks when it comes to the issue of race, when it comes to the issue of this tolerance of poverty that this country still allows, I can tell you there are heroes and villains who were Democrats and Republicans throughout the history of this country. I think that the thing that we're going to have to show when it comes to really addressing these issues is showing how racism and poverty is hurting us all. And I'm not just saying that. I have data to back me up. You want to understand the impact of the racial wealth gap? The racial wealth gap has cost this country $16 trillion in GDP over the past 2 decades. That's not gross domestic product. That's not GDP of a group. That's not GDP of a race. It's GDP. The racial wealth gap has hurt this entire country. The fact that we have policies that have been bigoted and racist in their foundations, the fact that we have things like unfair appraisal values in historically redlined neighborhoods, the fact that we had a GI Bill that was historic in creating wealth and opportunity for some but not all, the fact that we still had racist procurement policies when it comes to government dollars, that has not hurt a group. That's hurt everybody. The fact that we have child poverty that sits at the rate that we have. The fact, we talked about one of the shootings in Baltimore, a horrific shooting that happened July 4th weekend last year, where I've learned that when my phone rings in the middle of the night, it's never good news, and where my phone rang in the middle of the night to let me know that there was a mass shooting in the city of Baltimore, that there were dozens of people who were shot, and most of them were children, and it was in a community called Brooklyn, Maryland, not Brooklyn, New York. And one of the things that really struck me was, it wasn't just the horror of that night. But if you look at Brooklyn, 1 in 2 children in Brooklyn are growing up in poverty. 1 in 2. We have no right to mourn the micro if we are not willing to address the macro. And so I just think that this is not about what can we do to get Republicans to do this or get Democrats to do this. We've got to get America to take this seriously. America to take racism seriously. America to take xenophobia seriously. America to take anti-Semitism seriously. America to take anti-Islamic behavior seriously. America to take poverty seriously. Because when we do, that is not just about how we are going to impact a group. I am telling you, there is not a country in the world that will be able to keep up with America when America understands that America is for all of us and not just some.
I just want to clarify what I said earlier, is that at NPR, our colleagues have been looking into the policy positions of each candidate on the national ticket, and they're very different. And just it's not that they don't have a policy, it's that their policies are very different. Like, for example, last week on Morning Edition, we had a story about housing policy, and of course the Harris campaign has some very specific sort of capital requirements and things of that sort to enhance purchasability, to increase the supply of affordable housing. But when she asked the Trump campaign what's their policy, they said, well, if we deport all the illegal immigrants, it'll free up housing. I mean,
I heard the same thing on childcare yesterday. I heard a childcare answer yesterday that I'm still completely confused by. I have no idea what they're talking about, actually.
So all I'm saying is that you may not see it as a policy, but it's a point of view, and that's the only thing and of course I am giving you a very subtle plug to listen to Morning Edition. Do we have time for one more? Governor, can you take just one more very briefly? And then I want to give you time for a closing thought.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Do you still keep up with the other Westmore?
Oh, great question. Oh, wow. Great question. Yes. Yeah, I do. I guess just for a very, very brief background, I wrote a book called The Other Westmore. It was really a story about around the same time that I learned that I'd received the Rhodes Scholarship. I'd also learned that there was another young man who was involved in a horrible armed botched robbery of a jewelry store, and there was a murder that ended up happening, and the person who was killed was a 3-time recipient of Police Officer of the Year. He was a father of 5, a person who had triplets, and the reason he was working that second job as a security guard was his first job was as a police officer. His second job was security guard, and he was trying to make extra money for his family. and he went to work one day and he didn't come home. And I learned that around the same time that I received the Rhodes Scholarship, as there were stories about this horrible tragedy that happened, that one of the people that the police were looking for that was eventually captured and tried and convicted was a guy whose name was also Westmore. And you know, this book was really an exploration of how thin that line is between our life and someone else's life. That as I was at that time getting ready to head to Oxford on a scholarship, he was now getting ready to start what is now a life sentence in prison for his involvement in this crime. And the thing that I really wanted people to know and understand in this is that policies matter, that decisions matter, and I remember even having a conversation with Wes about it, where I was going through the process of thinking about this book, and you know, I asked him what he thought, and he said, "You should do it." And he said, because it's important that people understand both the decisions that they're making in their lives, and for people to understand the neighborhoods that these decisions are being made in, and I think you should do it. So it became something where I think I still think about often both of you know, I think about the family member of the officer often, and how it's just fundamentally unfair what happened to them.
So we're almost out of time, Governor. I did offer and tell everyone that you'd give us a closing thought. What would you like us to be thinking about as we go through the rest of our day? And thanks again to the Texas Tribune for inviting both of us to have this conversation. Leave us with a closing thought.
You know, we in Maryland, we became the first state in the country that now has a service year option for all of our high school graduates, where all of our high school graduates have a chance to have a paid year of service to the state of Maryland. And we did it for a few different reasons. One is we're big believers in experiential learning. We're big believers in paid financial cushions for people that are willing to do the work to make our society better. We're big believers in workforce development and workforce tools and platforms. And there's another big reason that I'll leave everyone with, that in this time of political divisiveness and political vitriol, that service will save us. Because those who serve together stay together. And I know I saw that in my own life where, you know, when I was running for governor, I had people who I served with in Afghanistan who came and campaigned for me. Many who were, you know, some who were not from Maryland, some who were not Democrats. But they were literally coming to knock on doors and say, "Let me tell you about the guy that I served with." That service is sticky. And I think that the best way for us to be a society that can get through this moment of this seeming political polarization and divisiveness is for us to be as a society that gets to know each other again, that works on hard things together, that understands that we are, in fact, our brothers and our sisters' keepers, and that people understand that if we can actually do that, that we are going to be a society that those who came before us hope for and those who come after us deserve. And so I just leave you with this, that service will save us. So it's important that each and every one of us get to work.
Wes Moore is the 63rd Governor of Maryland. Governor Moore, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all. Thanks, y'all.